Hi, everybody. Thank you all for staying. We're going to get started. There'll be some actors joining momentarily. My name is Nathan Winkelstein. I'm the Associate Artistic Director of Red Bull Theater, and I'll be moderating. Next, we'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jean Howard from Columbia.
And I've already introduced myself, so thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you for staying. That was fun to hear and to play with.
Very much.
I'll let Nathan moderate.
Yeah, no. Jesse's used to moderating, but because he's the director, he's making me do it for now. If you see me checking my phone, it's because we do have an online audience, so I'm having questions beamed in from across the country here. I promise I'm not bored. But to start, I'd love to go to Jean first.
Okay.
And I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of background about when Marlowe was writing this play, and at least in your opinion, why you think he was writing the play. What was he addressing in the current political situation of that time, or in his own style of writing that inspired him to write this play?
Well, he wrote this play sometime around 1590, and it's really interesting to me because it's pre-Shakespeare, but you can see all the ways in which he influenced particularly a play like Winkelstein. Hi, Matthew. Hi. Good to see you.
Matt Rauch, who played the Jew of Malta, and Priyanka, who played his daughter, and then Sam, who played about 17 different characters, including that level. Sorry, please continue on.
That's okay. Anyway, you can see immediately from looking at this play how it influenced later dramatists. And I think that Shakespeare was writing this in part because Marlowe was writing this, thank you, in part because at this time the English were beginning to explore the Mediterranean in a much more serious way. And all of the islands in the Mediterranean, from Malta to Rhodes, were important for guarding the trade from the east, and there's constant mention of ships and goods and Persian silks, things that are traveling through the Mediterranean into Venice sometimes, and this new cosmopolitan world in which Jews played a very important part. They were the moneylenders that helped the merchants do what they did. And interestingly, in this play, Barabbas is both a moneylender and a merchant. When you get to Shylock, he's just a moneylender. He himself is not a merchant. But Marlowe kind of conflates those two. So I think Marlowe was interested in exploring this Mediterranean world and the Turks who were there, the Christians who were there, the Jews who were there, and what kind of explosive mixture this was.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let me hand it over to Jesse then before we open it up to questions. So, Jesse, this play is a challenging play. It deals with challenging themes. And I guess the nice simple question is why you've been interested in this play for a long time. Maria-Christina, do you want to join us?
No, come on,
Maria-Christina. You've been interested in this play for a really long time, and I wonder what is it that has drawn you to the play, and is there anything specific that draws you to the play now?
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Jean, and thank you to all of these wonderful actors who spent the day on the play with me. I'm not sure I can answer that. I have been interested in the play for a long time. I think I first encountered it about 15 years ago, and I was first attracted to its and I think I still am mostly attracted to its incendiary, almost political cartoon of it, the willingness of the play to throw bombs at everybody, that it's not just the Jews that are bad, or the Christians that are bad, or the Turks that are bad, but it's kind of like, look how bad humanity can be to one another, but also there's a comedy, there's a comic thrill in it too, that Marlowe seems to be having fun. It's almost like I'm searching for the right analogy. It's almost like, a political cartoon is the best I can come up with now. Like the idea that we can traffic in these stereotypes and get people's blood boiling because you're dealing with real faiths and real people on one hand, but you're turning them into caricatures, and so there's an element of humor in that. So I am interested, I guess I've always been since I started Red Bull Theater from the very earliest days of the Revengers tragedy. There's a part of me, for whatever reason, is interested in the dramatic grotesques of comedy and horror living side by side that I think perhaps underlies, well, when you think about our contemporary society, when you think about the comedy and horror living side by side, I can just read the New York Times headlines now. So there's a part of me that thinks that just lays bare a truth, and that's one of the reasons I'm attracted to Marlowe.
But I would say that tonight, the way Matthew played Barabbas, it got more tragic overtones than I usually understand to be true of this play. There was definitely comedy, but you had a wound from the first act that really was deep and that carried you through even when you were doing your comic turns. I thought that was really interesting. It made this more a tragedy than the kind of tragic comic mix. It's on that side of those two, in my understanding of what happened tonight.
I think that it's easy when you're dealing with these plays that deal with such broad, sort of extreme moments to kind of two-dimensionalize characters. And structurally, this play is sort of a standard revenge tragedy. And playing Revengers, which I have done before, it's in various forms. It's really important to me, at least, to find the real person there, the humanity there, the wound that happens at the beginning becomes the sort of flame that ignites something that was already existing inside of that person. And so Jesse and I, we've talked about this play a lot for a long time, and it's obviously a very controversial play. There's a lot of hot button issues and people have opinions about it. But as a piece of drama, it was important to me to find the reality at the beginning of the play of who is this person and what does he want and what is he doing and what does he need and what happens to him that gets us to this freaking insane fifth act. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get there in a sort of real way? And by doing that, the extremity of the play, I think, can hold some real water. I think, Gene. I'm not sure. I mean, that's what I was trying tonight. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that we have lots of questions about or responses from the audience. Even if it is a response, if you could just put a little question mark on the end of it, so that we could at least, pretend to stick to the form, that would be great. Noah.
Hi, I love this play too. And I have a question about the meeting between Barabbas and Ithamore, which feels to me like the moment where the play turns from what feels like it might be a tragedy to something that's more like a grotesque comedy. And when you were playing him and when you were directing him, what did you think was happening in that scene? How does that transformation take place? And that Barabbas decides to create the character of Barabbas, because it feels to me like he is creating a character in that moment.
Yeah, it's a good question. May I? I think in this context, we didn't really decide. That's the truth. I mean, the reality is, for those of you who have never seen these readings before, we spent 5 hours with the play today. Like, that's all that happened. And so you barely get through the whole thing before you actually get up and read it in front of 200 people and however many people are watching online. And so I don't mean to be flip about your question, because it's a really good question. That we got to that moment in the play and we were like, what the hell is going on here? Like, all of a sudden Barabbas has this idea and here's Ithamore and he's going to make him a villain, and like, wait a second, the play totally turns. I think in a rehearsal process and in a sort of a long pre-production process, there would be a decision that would happen. Something has to happen either right before or during that scene that causes Barabbas to be interested in Ithamore and Ithamore to see in Barabbas something in himself that sort of propels the next act of the play. I don't know what it is. I really don't. That's the answer.
But it's right before that he has gotten his money back.
Fair enough.
Enough. He got his money back so he can now be a player again in this world.
Right.
But he's got this revenge impulse.
Right.
And he has to have a partner, and he has to have a mode of operating.
Right.
And it's going to partly be a comic mode.
Sure.
But driven by this desire for revenge.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right to locate this in the revenge drama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, structurally, it's a revenge tragedy.
Exactly.
If it was called the tragedy of Barabbas, you would totally get it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, normally, right before the Ithamore moment, there'd be a little speech in which Barabbas says, Richard III style, now here's what I'm going
Right.
to do. He doesn't say that in this
Right.
play. I don't know if you cut it. Maybe he cut it. But that's what should happen. And so I couldn't quite locate psychologically, how that shift happened. But I guess you're right, Gene, that it happens kind of in the previous scene.
I think so.
Yeah.
I agree, you're both right, and I don't disagree with Matt. We would want to spend more time with it, because what follows is that I think what you're alluding to, Noah, that long speech where he says, and I did all these things.
Yeah.
And I did all these.
Which there's no reason for us to believe that he's done,
No.
right?
Yeah.
But there's no reason for you to believe he hasn't
done
done
it.
it.
Yeah, we don't know.
But now he's
We don't
putting that
know.
on. Yeah.
We don't know, yeah. Yes, is it Roger? Yeah.
I'm relating to that. I'm not sure that today's audience would ask a question like that very good question in Elizabethan times, because if it were a naturalistic play, there would be writing that would justify some of these changes and fill out some of that things. A case in point, a play like Taming of the Shrew, you can't, in the writing, justify sometimes everything in terms of the naturalistic progression. The audiences of Elizabethan times had an imagination that maybe didn't need to be filled out the way we are used to it being, and it wasn't the same kind of issue that is very justified to ask today. It's just a thought.
Question mark.
Just a thought.
Thank you. Yeah, it's right here in the fourth.
What I've often read is that there was a great competition in Shakespeare's mind between him and Marlowe, the greatest playwright during that period of time. And certainly, The Merchant of Venice, in my opinion, many people's opinion, is a better play than this.
Yes.
My question, however, is...
I think we can admit that.
Oh, come on.
Very different,
Point.
yeah.
The point is, did Marlowe have anything he based this play on where a Jew was a major protagonist in a play, or even a Jew appeared in a play prior to Marlowe?
Well, if you go back to the Middle Ages, something like the Croxton play of the Sacrament has got a Jew who is a comic Jew who bakes babies in ovens and so forth and desecrates the host. There's a long history of anti-Semitic drama in Britain. In the early modern period, right before Shakespeare and Marlowe wrote, not so much, but there are usury plays that you won't have read because they're just unbelievable, that did precede this, but they don't have a character like this in it. They have anti-Semitic tropes and the connection of the Jew with avarice and so forth. So that's all there as a kind of background
So is it
from the
kind
Middle
of a
Ages
marriage
on.
of the anti-Jewish tropes and the vice character in
Yes,
Barabbas?
there is in Barabbas some vice character. Yeah.
And I do know there was also, I don't know the exact time of it, but there was also the Trick to Catch the Old One, where there was a Jewish side character that is like dying of lockjaw, and there's a whole comedic bit of like laughing at him as he dies of lockjaw.
I can't remember the play well enough.
Yeah, I only remember it because I was like, whoa, when we did it. But to kind of rolling off that question, we have a question from our online audience, which I'm going to expand slightly, from Eva, who is asking, what was the response that Shakespeare was trying to make with Merchant of Venice? And so I guess I have some question of how the audience of Shakespeare's day might have received this play versus Merchant. We think of them as distinctly different, and we think of like the humanity that Shylock is given as being really exceptional. Would the audiences of Shakespeare's day have really picked up on that, or were they both just kind of anti-Semitic fun clown characters?
I think.
Do you know?
Do you want?
I'm just
I'll
guessing.
make a stab
Were,
at
were
this.
you there?
I was there. I was there. I was there.
No, wait, that wasn't an age joke. Y'all went there. I didn't go there.
Yes, Nathan, she was there. Okay, come on.
Jean has a time machine.
Right. I think Shakespeare made a greater attempt than Marlowe to make Shylock human and to invite us into his suffering. I do think that. I don't think that means that Marlowe did not create a character that an actor like Matthew could humanize. You know, this isn't a naturalist play. On the other hand, there's plenty there to work with in Shylock's part. So I think there's some continuum here rather than, you know, this guy was just dealing in stereotypes and this one was giving us a human figure of the Jew. There's something more than that.
Jean and I have been agreeing with each other for a long time, years now.
Yes.
And I think it's, I'll go back to something I referred to earlier. I think it's a mistake to assume that Marlowe was writing in 2 dimensions and Shakespeare was writing in 3 dimensions. Is Shakespeare a better writer? Of course. Is The Merchant of Venice a better play than The Jew of Malta? Probably, right? Yes. But some of the language in The Jew of Malta is actually quite extraordinary, and I think, does this play exist it's not a Chekhov play, it's not realistic, but I think it's important when you approach these plays to approach the people as real, as people who need things and want things and do things for reasons, and not for sort of made up reasons. I think it's really important to approach these plays 3-dimensionally, or the plays can't land. And I have to believe, as an actor and a theater artist, and the reason these plays have survived for 400 years, it is that there is something human about them. There is something universal about them. And the fact that Marlowe, you know, died when he was 29 and was probably, when he died, an inferior writer to Shakespeare, but I'm not sure that this is a worse play than, say, Richard III, which is Shakespeare's, what, 2nd play? Richard III is not a very good play. It's a great character, but it's not a very good play. And so this notion that Marlowe was somehow inferior, I believe if Marlowe had lived, he would have been the equal of Shakespeare. I believe that. And I think it's really important to approach these characters as a dramatist trying to make a real world that fit in the world that he was living in. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I would only add, I mean, the only thing that comes to mind, and perhaps in the answer to one of these questions too, is that, thank you, Maria-Christina.
Thank you. I'm so sorry to catch the train. Thank you.
I think we're not that, personally, I don't think that we're that different from the people 400 years ago, and this play was incredibly popular.
Yeah.
And was in the repertory for a long time, and there's a lot of information about the nose being loaned out and things like that to other companies, right? I think there was a question over here that didn't.
Yes.
A question kind of about the structure of a revenge tragedy and how Marlowe played with structure a lot. Matt, you made a comment about the lack of an aside at that moment that we might be let into. Were there other things about the structure of this play that differ from other revenge tragedies of the age?
I mean, I'll say, just watching it today, one of my frustrations with this play is that this seems to be episodic in a way that the other revenge tragedies that we've worked on are a little more propulsively linear, moving towards a clear climax. But I think with some more clever editing, we can get there. I think it kind of goes off into some avenues, and you have to do a little too much work to set up each thing in the second half. I found watching it tonight, so I don't think it's as strong a structure as some of the other revenge tragedies.
But there are some more arcs to develop. I mean, everybody focuses on Barabbas for obvious reasons, and he's got to have his arc. But Abigail does too, you know, and it's really interesting to compare Abigail to Jessica, and I think Abigail is just as interesting a character as Jessica.
Oh, absolutely.
And that is a real arc. I'd love to hear you talk about how you thought about the evolution of that character. And there's also the Ithamore. I don't think we've finished at all with Ithamore and Barabbas. I think there's a lot to bring out in that relationship. How much does Barabbas actually love Ithamore? I mean, it's sometimes homoerotic in the dialogue. So what is that about? And is there more tragedy in Ithamore's betrayal than maybe we were able to see tonight on 1 through? So I think there are other things to follow here
That's true.
that would densify and they would begin to talk to one another. Yeah, but I'd love to hear what you thought about playing Abigail and whether you could find a through line for her from first to last.
I think it's interesting. We were all talking during our break about the different themes in this play and how money. You know, we talk a lot about the religious tensions and the.
A little louder, please.
Oh, sorry. We were talking during the break about the things we've noticed in this play just from working on it today, and how the main themes we all focus on are the religious tensions that are obviously at the forefront of it, but how there seems to be another through line about money and capitalism and chasing greed, and how ultimately there's one way to read this where each character's loyalty is to money. And I'm curious to hear, because I mean, I've just come into this today. But I think Abigail stands out as not, she's the one character that doesn't have that.
Yes.
She's not chasing money. She's not chasing power. She's not chasing any kind of greed. She ultimately is just, it's loyalty, right? Even in her dying breath, she says, don't tell anyone. I don't want my dad to die. So I think there's something to be said of her being, she's not without her prejudices, and she's not a completely innocent or unbiased character, but I think she is the closest, maybe one of the closest we come to representing innocence and loyalty. I'm not completely sure what that means in the whole context. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that, but unless we are out of time. Just whatever. Okay, no.
No, sorry, repeat the question. Nailed it. Thanks so much. Thanks, Priyanka.
I would love to send it back and hear about how you see Abigail's role in
No, I think you've got it right, that she is the one who doesn't seem interested in morally matters. She's in love with somebody, and she gets thwarted by her father, and that's just the most incredible disappointment to her. And her conversion to Christianity is the interesting part. You know, is that a rebellion against her father's religion? Or is it the only safe space she can imagine, which, as we see in the play, isn't really a very safe space, the convent. So, you know, that's something to think about in developing this character.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to work on it in a longer rehearsal process, because my first impressions are not necessarily a true loyalty to Christianity or a true conversion, but more just as you said, a rebellion or a counterculture almost to getting away from what she's been entrapped in almost. But that's a question for like a longer development. Yeah.
Yes, right over here.
I'm really confused because it was my impression that Barnabas wanted her to convert. That was part of the...
So she converts twice, and this may have been lost. And the first time she does it at his behest in order to steal the gold out of his house.
Right.
But the second time she does it because she realizes that her father's betrayed her.
It's a Jacobean tragedy. The plot.
Yeah, wait.
I'm curious, with the possible exception of Abigail, it's such an amoral universe. I mean, these are all terrible people, basically, which we at Red Bull, who love the Jacobeans, are very happily familiar with. But I'm wondering if that would have been shocking in the time when Marlowe was writing in the 1580s and early 1590s, or would that have been a common thing in those early modern plays, pre-Shakespeare?
I think there were plenty of plays that trafficked in these extreme amoral characters. They're interesting dramatically, and what they wanted to do was hold an audience. And yeah, I think there's a lot of this. And you know, they had to play big. They were playing on an outdoor stage. They were cultivating audiences. This kind of play cultivated audiences.
I mean, bad people make good TV. Just turn on your streaming right now. There's a lot of bad people in drama for 500 years. I think it's compelling. And
it's also interesting though, because like, if you kind of remove the idea of like them being bad or amoral, then you sort of almost can replace it with that thing that you were talking about, you know, either your desire for something is so strong that it overpowers the things that you know you probably ought to do, or your wound is so great that you have no other thought than to revenge yourself, which is, I think, maybe interesting that like of these characters, Barabbas is the one who we see a really legitimate cause for why he's so bent on this. With all the other characters who want something, that want power or money or sex or whatever it might be, I can't think of anyone who's like injured and therefore needs to seek some kind of recompense. They all just seem to really want something.
Great. Yes, right here.
Okay, so to Wendy's point is the use of the characters of the Turks or the Ottomans and the Maltese Christians and the Jews a political expediency to make some of the bad people not English, not recognizable within the context of the play.
Yes, I mean, these are projections out onto other people of things that English people were struggling with, you know, like the increase of commerce and what that did to traditional morality in London, and one could talk about that. So yeah, you put it off on somebody else. But it's also just exotic. I mean, the costume of the Jew, the costume of the Turk, those would be gorgeous pieces on the Elizabethan stage, you know. And so it's partly about how dazzling you can make the open stage if you've got the right costumes. You know, the red beard, probably, the bottle nose, the gabardine. That's what a Jew would be clad in.
And here comes Martin del Bosco.
Exactly. Yes, you've got a Spaniard and you've got a Turk, and oh my God, it would be great.
I'm just going to take a moment to say goodbye to our online audience, who unfortunately has to go. We're going to keep going in here, but thank you all for tuning in and watching. Goodbye, online audience. Look.